Culture of the Teutons. Chapter 4. Luck. Besides honor, man needs something which in the ancient language is called luck. Our translation, however, which draws the sense of chance into the foreground, fails altogether to indicate the true force of the word. The associations of the modern term, stretching the sense of chance or fortune, all run counter to the spirit of ancient culture, and there is no other way of reaching a full understanding than by patient and unprejudiced reconstruction of Teutonic psychology. Whichever way we turn, we find the power of luck. It determines all progress. Where it fails, life sickens. It seems to be the strongest power, the vital principle, indeed, of the world. When a man's fields yielded rich harvest, when his lands were rarely visited by frost or drought, he was said to be assail, i.e., he possessed the luck of fertility. When his cattle throve and multiplied, always returning safe and undepleted from their summer grazing grounds, then he was facile, or i.e., he had the luck of cattle. The dweller on a barren strip of coast had little use for luck in the fields, but would on the other hand probably be lucky with his fishing, or he would be berisel. That is, he would always have the wind in his favor. There was a famous family in the north of Norway, the men of Frafenste, of whom it is related that as soon as they hoisted sail, a wind sprang up, even though it had been perfectly calm a moment before. Hadding, too, had, according to Saxo, a peculiar power of making best use of a wind, for though his pursuers were running before the same wind, and had not fewer sails, they could not overtake him. This trait is in the north not a fairy tale motive, nor the invention of an imaginative saga writer. The Olafs of Norway likewise had the reputation of being favored by the weather, and this undoubtedly with full historical justification. Olaf Tryggvason was so much more berisel than other men that he sailed in one day as much as others in 3. In the list of the kings of Sweden there is one Eric Weatherhat, so called from his having, as it were, the wind in his hat. He could change it by turning his headgear about. This particular form of luck was not lost when the coast dwellers of the northern sea moved to Iceland. It is told of an Icelander that he was so berisel he could always determine which harbor he would make, and of another that he sailed in one day as much as others in 3. Other men again had as their dominant attribute luck of battle. When professional warriors, like Angot Gildney, seek to express their faith in a few words, they can find nothing to say but that they trust in the strength and the sigasil, their gift of victory. Among the chieftains, this gift of victory shows in its full splendor. We find men of military genius, who bring victory in their train wherever they go. All the Norwegian kings of Harald Fairhair's race had this great gift of victory, and when Earl Haakon was able for a time to fill the place as ruler of Norway, it was due not least to his luck in winning victories, in pursuing and killing. It kept the people on his side, for they held that no one could be like him in respect of this particular gift. A like tone is apparent in the opening of the story in the Beowulf, about Hrothgar's kingdom. Unto him was given war speed and battle honor, so that his kinsmen followed him until the younglings were waxen and gathered about him in their host. Winner of battles, the king is often called an Anglo-Saxon, and the name expresses what the Germanic people asked of and trusted to in a ruler, both in the great leader of the land, the king himself, and the minor leaders, local princelings as well as freebooter Vikings without land. The presence of the chieftain was a guarantee to the people of victory in the fight. The Anglo-Saxons gathered boldly to oppose the foreign kings, if only they had a man of chieftain's rank to take the lead and call the local forces together. As long as he was standing, they would fight with scorn of death for hearth and home. But when word went around to assemble in mutual aid, without the inspiration of a born leader, they would remain at home, or they run off to the woods and leave the invaders to work their will within the village. Once, when the East Anglians were attacked by Penda, the victorious and generally feared king of Mercia, They found no other resource in their need than to go to their old king, Sigbert, who, out of love for the heavenly light, had renounced the throne and shut himself up in a monastery. They begged him and implored him to come out and lead the host, and though he thrust aside the weapons, with uplifted hands calling to witness his monk's vow to God in heaven, they then forced him into the battle. This picture of the king in a monk's cowl, dragged into the fight with a willow stick in his hand, and there slain, is the more touching for its deep historical significance. And when they saw that their leader was fallen, they fled, every a man. This sentence occurs again and again in the sagas, and its truth is confirmed again and again by history. If the great man's war luck failed, what could the lesser luck of lesser men avail? Gregory relates that Hjörleifr won the decisive battle against the Alemanni by vowing himself to Christ when things were at their worst. Hardly had he turned his mind in the right directions when his enemies took to flight, and when they saw their king was fallen, they surrendered and begged for mercy. The opening of the narrative agrees, but poorly, with the sequel. The fact is that the pious tendency of the historians has had its way at the first, and that required only Hjörleifr and Christ. In return, history has its way with the clerk in the after sentence, and gives the king of the Alemanni his due. But even admitting that the myth of Christ as the giver of victory is but ill-grafted, the pious author is intrinsically right in making Christ manifest his glory, in dispelling the power that he had been strongest among the heathen, viz., or the king's luck. These little pictures from life transfer us, at a stroke, to another word. Luck is working before our eyes with all the power it had over men's minds, to strengthen and to strike with numbness, and its foremost representative, the king, its peculiar characters properly revealed. The king's warluck can prevail against an army. When the king comes, surrounded by his little host, the peasants are scattered like lambs at scent of a wolf. This happened constantly in an age when every man was a warrior from his youth up. It is not very likely that the king's retainers should be very far ahead of the well-to-do yeomen of the country in respect of courage and skill at arms, for the king's bodyguard was in Norway, and as far as regards the earliest times among the other Germanic peoples as well, composed for the most part of young volunteers, each of whom served a number of years till he had attained such a degree of training and renown as he considered fitting for his position in society. Throughout the first 2 centuries of Norwegian history, that is to say, the childhood of the kingdom of Greater Norway, when the sovereignty was little speaking, never left 10 years undisputed. Tradition records hardly a single battle wherein a peasant army succeeded in offering effective resistance to the bodyguard led by the king himself. The victory at Stiklestad, where the yeoman won the day over the king's men, is a triumph almost unique in history. The victors fled from the field in a panic terror, and the conquered prince went out of the battle as a demigod. When Olaf showed himself amid his array, the peasants' arms fell down. Their minds were confused in a moment, and they were on the point of running away every a man. Strenuous urging and incitement were the remainders of Olaf's hated rule, where needed to keep them in their places. And if we may believe the saga's description of the fight, the courage of the peasants was rather a sort of desperation, convulsion, in which they fear found vent, because their legs refused to carry them from the field. Olaf's fall let loose a panic in the peasants' army. The men scattered and ran to seek cover in their homes, and 6 months later the king was adjudged a saint. Whether the saga men are to be taken as recorders of fact or as imaginative poets, the value of their sketches as psychological documents remains unimpaired. In the minds of the Northmen, the Battle of Stiklestad and the days preceding it were clothed with a mystic spell, and the memories were condensed into a picture, at once soberly realistic in details and mythic as a whole. In Olaf, the ancient king's luck was transfigured. In the strength of his luck he was exalted to martyr's glory, and his saintship bridges over the gap between the old faith and the new creed. The Christian poets praise the king's saint for giving all men harvests in peace. To get a comprehensive view of the king's luck, we have to ask, what was demanded in the old days to make a man a true king. War speed, the power of victory, is but one of the distinguishing marks which place the leader in a class apart from everyday characters. His constitution is marked throughout by great strength and hardihood. Life is more firmly seated in him, whether it be that he is proof against weapons, or that they seem, perhaps, to turn aside from the spot where he stands. The first time Olaf Tryggvason misses his mark is when he aims his bow at Earl Eric. Truly this earl's luck is great, he exclaims, in the ancient wise. It is said of Harold Hiddleton that Odin had granted him immunity from wounds, so that no cutting edge could scathe him, and even though perhaps such a degree of hardiness was only found among the very few particularly favored, we must presume that the king had this advantage over ordinary warriors, that his wounds healed more easily and more completely. At any rate, he possessed a healing power which could be communicated to others. The Germanic chief had here at least one qualification for saintly rank, and one that counted for much in the early Middle Ages, when Christianity justified itself to a great extent by its power over sickness. There is no doubt but that those germs of saintliness in the kingship were eagerly fostered. We may perhaps venture to say, with unconscious purpose, the miracles and legends of southern Europe cling easily to Olaf, and it came natural for people to see healing at the king's resting place. At the time when Olaf's brother Harald Hardrada and his son Magnus reigned jointly over Norway, a mother came with her son, who had lost his memory, to ask advice of King Harald. The king opined that the patient suffering from dreamlessness, and counseled her to let the boy drink of Magnus's washing. Thereafter, sleep on Magnus's couch. The effect was instantaneous. Both kings appeared to him in a dream, and said the one, "Have health," and the other, "Have quickness and memory." And then the boy woke laughing, having recovered the power of remembering. The kings of the Franks had not less of this healing power. A mother cured her son with a decapitation from the fringe of King Guldbum's cloak. In early times it was presumably a common belief that the king had hands of healing, as we find in the invocation of Sigdrifa. "Give us 2 aethelings, herself and Sigurd, speech and wit, and hands of healing while we live." The most violent attacks of nature, too, fell scatheless upon the king's luck. "Kings never drown," said William Rufus, when he put out in the Channel in a boat during a gale, to quell a revolt in Normandy on its first outbreak. Olaf the Saint, on his crossing to Norway, was in great danger during a storm, but the good men with him, and his own luck, brought him unscathed to land. With equal right, and Olaf might have said that kings were never weather-bound. At any rate, it was one of a chieftain's natural attributes, that his luck always gave him a favoring wind. The waters, too, carried shoals of fish into the ruler's lands. We may suppose, it is said of Earl Harkon, that in his time fish came up into all the fjords. Luck of fertility prevailed over his fields, giving close ears of corn and good weight in the ear. Lucky in seasons and procuring peace are the titles given to the mythically kingly ideal of the Swedes. Fjolnir Ygnufsson, and if we add Sigursil, victorious. We have the triple chord that embraces all life. A king without wars might be an exception, but he must be Frithsil, or mighty for peace. In the sense of keeping the war outside his own frontiers, or at least preventing it from harrying the fields, war is to throw up a flood of honor and renown about him, heaping up jewels and spoil, but not fail destructively upon the land swelling with corn and the cattle heavy with fat. It is hard to fight against the king's luck, and much avails the king's luck. Thus old saws sum up the hardness and the massiveness of the chieftain's gift, and the wisdom implied in these sayings amounts to such saga consoles as this: one must not set oneself athwart the great man's luck, but let oneself be borne on by it. When a man entered the king's ranks, and let his own warluck be inspired by the higher, he became, in the most literal of senses, worth more himself. The king was so full of luck that he could radiate it out to all those near him, and could even send it away to act at a distance, if one could get a chieftain to approve of any enterprise by his words. I will add my luck. Then one had his war luck in one's weapons, his weather luck in one's sails. Of such a man it can simply be said, he goes not alone, for the king's luck goes with him. And a request to undertake a desperate enterprise on the king's behalf was often granted with the words, I will attempt it with your luck. A man in the king's favour, as for instance Halfred the Wayward Skald, lived all his life in the shadow of the king's luck. When on one occasion he was attacked from behind, he prayed to Christ for aid, and succeeded with God's help and by Olaf's luck in beating off the attack. His opponent knew him for a man protected by special favour, and were cautious in attacking him. His bitter foe, Gris, whom he had injured most bloodily by ravishing his wife, was glad of a chance to avoid meeting him in single combat, and declared that he was loath to fight against the king's luck. The belief in the king's power to put his luck into others, and their undertakings, is worked up by the Icelanders into an amusing tale about a poor man, Hroi, his failings and successings. Hroi was a skilful smith and an enterprising merchant, brave and born with wits, but somehow fortune declined to favour his plans. However much gold he might amass, it went to the bottom as soon as he put to sea, and when he had forged his way up again by skill of his trade, he lost all his savings in his business deals. Then he betrothed himself of going to King Svein Forkbeard and proposing partnership. When he appeared before King Svein with his plans for the trading, the king's men spoke strongly against the idea of entering into partnership with a man so notoriously unlucky in his dealings. But Rory retorted confidently, the king's luck is more powerful than my ill fortune, and the king himself was too far-seeing not to give his argument more weight than all objections. From that day forward, Wealth sought out Rory. On peaceable trading expeditions he harried the coasts of the Baltic for gold, and never once lost a cargo at sea. He shared his spoils with the king, thus turning his friendship into affection, and to crown all he won the princess, for though the bride was of no higher birth than the daughter of Swedish grandee, she was at any rate as good as the average princess. It is the criterion, in fact, of the king's luck, that it overflows and fills others with its abundance. On the field of battle, the king's luck sweeps like a storm out over the enemy, opens a road for those who follow after him, and whirls them on to victory. But beneath this stormy power there runs a quiet, unbroken stream of luck that can bear, and does bear, the people up, inspiring its work with blessing, and making it thrive. We chance upon a piece of information for the Burgundians, to the effect that they gave their kings the credit for good harvests in the land, and in return made them suffer when the harvests failed. The Northmen judged in precisely the same fashion. According to mythical history, the Swedes even went to the point of sacrificing their king, Domaldi, for a good harvest, a persistent famine having occurred during his reign. At the introduction to Norway's history stands Halfdan Aseli, the greatest harvest-giver the people had ever known, as a king of prototype of Hroldi Fairhair's dynasty. For a long time it looked as if the luck of the Halfdan family were broken, in the time of the sons of Eric. There were years of great dearth, and the longer they ruled over the country, the harder grew their general distress, and we are expressly told that the people laid the bad harvests to the charge of these kings. Then arose a new race of rulers, in whom the blessings was full and whole. During the reign of Earl Hakon, such a change took place in the harvests, that not only did the corn grow up wherever it had been sown, but the herring came up all round the land. But with the other branches of the old stock Halfdan, the harvest-giver rose up again, and in Olaf the Saint his heritage was canonized. For God's man gives all men harvest and peace. Thus sings the poet Thorin Loftga in honor of the sainted king. We must not, however, rush to the conclusion that Teutonic kingship rested upon certain persons' magic power of styling themselves magicians, From a modern point of view, a king might seem sufficiently tasked in having to govern sun and moon and an element or so besides, and any demand beyond such meteorological aptitude would be thought excessive. Still, other qualities were needed to raise a man to chieftainship under those old conditions. To appreciate the genius of the Teutonic king, we must walk round and look at him from the social point of view as well, and our understanding will depend on our ability to combine the knowledge gained upon these two sides. We need not seek far and wide to ascertain what the king looked like. Both ideal pictures and actual portraits have been handed down to us. In Harold Fairhair's race, the type appears as follows: tall, or taller than the most of men, strong, handsome, the handsomest of all the men, forward in the fight, skillful above all others in the use of weapons, an all-around athlete, archer, swimmer. Among the kings of Norway, Olaf Tryggvason is the perfect realization of the ideal. He could strike equally well with both bands, throw 2 spears at once, and walk upon the oars while the men were rowing, juggling the 3 swords in the air. Ambitious and ever watchful that none should in any respect outstep him, never content with the honor gained as long as there was more to gain. Deep and far-seeing in his plans, clever to use all means that could further the end in view, and eloquent and persuasive, so that men wished no other thing than what he proposed. Glad, cheerful, generous to his men, winning so that all young brave men were drawn to him. Rich in counsel and faithful, stern towards his enemies and those of his friends, a perfect friend to him who was his friend. This is the Germanic type of king that inspires the innumerable encomiums in Teutonic literature. It is reflected in the description of Offa by the poet of the Beowulf. The spear-bold man, praised far and wide for gifts and war, wisely ruling the lands of his heritage. It is elaborated over and over in the Nordic songs and sagas. Tall, handsome, brave, skillful, generous. These words indicated the totality of virtues which no king could do without. Lacking one quality, would lack all. The praises really indicated a demand, a formulation of what was required of the king. Not only the king who ruled over wide lands must fulfill the requirements of the ideal, but even the chieftain, whose sphere was restricted to a small district, had to possess a certain, but not insignificant portion of these qualities. This comprehensive perfection, moral and physical, belonged to the nature of chieftainship. Even a petty village leader was expected to stand firmly by the rights of his friends, and see that none encroached upon them. He must be so respected that outsiders were loath to interfere with them, and any man in the village had the right to bring an injury he was unable to himself to repair to the door of the chief, and if it were left there unavenged, it brought down infallibly the knighthood upon the chieftain's whole race. It needed strength to take up such an heritage, and when disputes arose within the district itself, the chieftain was the proper person to put matters to right, to solve the difficulty, so that all were content with his decision. When we call to mind that the king, in such a case, found himself placed between 2 honors, both equally susceptible and equally indispensable, we may presume that he would need to be gifted with a very high degree of craft and ingenuity, and generosity withal, so that he was not afraid of sacrificing something of his own in order to heal a wounded honor. We can provide a background for our superstition by considering how an Icelandic chieftain, Thorkel Krafla, behaved on one occasion when a man had been killed at the Lothing. With a party ready for vengeance, he went to the booth where the slayer was. In the doorway he was encountered by the man's mother, who had a claim on Thorkel, having once saved his life. She tried to make her influence felt, but he met her intervention with the words, "Matters stand differently now than when we last spoke together. But go you out, that you need not see your son stricken down." She immediately acted upon the hint, dressed her son in her own clothes, and sent him out with the women. And when Thorkel had seen him safely out, he placed himself in the doorway and talked sense. "It is not fitting that we should kill our own neighbors and thingfellows. It were better at least to come to an agreement." This is an episode from the late saga times, but an episode of the sort that occurs frequently enough upon the steppes and in the mountains, where the tribe still lives in ancient fashion under the rule of a chief. It was no sinecure to inherit royal dignity. Kingship required genius and great gifts. But these qualities were included upon the royal character, that the born leader could achieve such great things, could procure his subjects right and honor, and, what was still more difficult, maintain their honors in their proper relation one to another, is due to the very depth and might of his luck. It was easier for him than for others to bring men to agree, and get men to follow him. The young men looked up to him, wished not but what he willed. The older men brought their difficulties to him, because he wassen veel, or had the luck or gift of friendship, because he had manihil, the gift of dealing with men. It can also be said in explanation of his popularity that he gained affectionate early by his beauty and his gentleness in speech, blathlete. Of another king it is spoken that he won the love of his men for being mighty and wise, and a great harvest giver. He would translate by wise is a very expressive term, denoting craft, quickness, wit, adroitness, in other words, diplomacy. His friend luck depended upon various factors. Not the least part of it was due to his power of strewing gold about him. Youth did not flock to the court of a niggardly king, but all those gifts entered into the king's luck, diplomacy as well as generosity, and beauty as well as eloquence. There is no separating the qualities which we should call natural from the gifts of healing and fertility. It would be foolish to regard the superiority of the king's bodyguard over the peasant army as due to a superstitious panic for the king's person, and deny that the fatal significance of his fall to the outcome of the battle stood in natural relation to his importance as leader of the fight. And this was well known. Such words as leader of the host, ranger of battles, were often used as epithets for a chieftain. There is not the least reason to regard these honorable titles as of late origin, and accuse the other Germanic peoples of lacking insight as to the king's generalship. Surely as the king could and should bring about victory, radiating strength and courage into those who came near him, and darkening the eyes of his enemies till they stumbled over their own plans. So surely was it also of great importance to him to possess a well-disciplined army, and be able himself to take advantage of the tactical opportunities with a corps that in the way hung together of itself. All these, the discipline of the army, the generalship of its leader, the force of his blow, his power of compelling victory, are part of the king's luck. Whether we say the king had luck in learning the use of weapons and the art of war, to remain unwounded in the midst of the fight, or we credit him with a gift for the profession of arms, a gift which made lethal weapons fall harmlessly from him, it all comes to the same thing. The king was the luckiest, that is to say, inter alia, the bravest, most skilful, wisest, and most ingenious of warriors. To sum up luck in the view of the Teutons is not a thing that comes from without, setting the seal upon abilities and enterprises. Every day we encounter instances of the great difference between men's fortunes. Poor folk have but one luck. They gain no more than the minimum reward for their plans. Others, luck hangs about them like dirt, as the proverb rubs in Jutland. The simple cannot get rid of it. But the Teuton did not draw the inference from the experience that will and result. Ability and luck come from different sides of existence, and play blind man's bluff one with the other. He did not lay down inefficiency as the prime principle in human life, and appoint fate or gods to keep all the strength and bear all the blame for the evil results. A man's luck of harvest is the power that inspires him to watchfulness, restless work, letting his arms wield the pick with good effect, which sets pace and force upon his actions. It leads its pick so that he does not strike vainly in the stubborn, defiant soil, but opens pores for fruitfulness. It sends the corn up out of the ground, sharpens the young shoot to pierce the earth above it, saves the naked, helps plant from freezing to death, and the grown corn from standing unsusceptible to sun and rain, and turning nothing out of sheer helplessness. It follows the crops home, stays with them through threshing and crushing, and gives the bread or the gruel power of nourishment when the food is set upon the board. The luck of harvesting and sailing and conquering are all equally two-sided according to our notions. A man is blessed in his cattle when the animals grow fat and heavy with what they eat, when their udders swell full with milk, when they multiply, when they go to the summer grazing without scath of wolf or bear, when they come home full tale upon the autumn. But his luck is equally apparent upon his power to seek them out and find them, should they stray, in places where no other would think to look. Sailing implies maneuvering, conquering implies valor and shrewdness, luck and wisdom implies skill in making plans when needed. The sons of Igmund were referred to of men of great luck. It is hard to stand against the luck of the sons of Igmund. Men feared Jokul's courage and Bersark violence, but not least the wit and luck of his elder brother, Thorstein. This luck displays itself in his always knowing or guessing beforehand what his opponents had in mind. He saw through every artifice of war, even when wrought by witchcraft, so that it was never possible to take him and his brothers by surprise. Their luck shows itself in the fact that they could wait, let time go on, make preparations, or strike upon the instant without hesitation. The blow always fell at the right moment for them. When their father had been killed in their absence, and the slayer Hulfe had got away safely to his kin, Thorstein restrains his brother by saying, "We must seek him out by craft, and not rush wildly on." He then pays a visit to the man who had concealed Hrolfith, and by dexterous handling gets him to give up the unlucky one, and send him away from the homestead. It matters nothing with what you may say, Thorstein quietly argues. He is undoubtedly here. It is more to your good that he should be rendered harmless, such ill as he does against your will. It is not only for my father's sake that I am after him. He has wrought too much mischief that we can sit still now. We can take him outside your boundaries, so that no shame falls to you upon the matter. Only tell him yourself that he is not safe here, and 100 in silver can well spare. And as calmly as Thorstein has argued his case here, so too he stays on as a guest till the following day, and on the way back from the homestead informs his brothers that Hrolf must surely have gone home to his mother, the witch-wife, and must be taken there before she has time to work her arts over him. By hard riding they were able to surprise the party in the midst of their preparations for the black magic by which the old hag intended to make her son hard against perils. They managed things so cleverly that she did not acquire power over them by catching sight of them before they had seen her. They saw through all dazzlement, and recognized the old woman herself in spite of all of her tricks. And she was indeed right when she said, "I was near to having revenged my son, but these sons of Igmund are men of great luck." Thus it fell out with all who had matters outstanding with Thorstein. However they might set their plans, whether they had to recourse to witchcraft or simple cunning, they always found him ready for them. He saw through everything from a distance, and when he arrived upon the spot, no optical illusions could avail, for he saw all things as they were, in their true nature, as another saga has it. Naturally, a chieftain could not be suspicious and always go about scenting danger, for such a craven caution would be an infallible sign that he had not the luck of wisdom, but fumbled forever in the dark. The king simply saw through the chill of things, and knew what lay hidden behind pretended friendliness, and could therefore sit calm and secure where all was well, without letting his comfort be encroached upon by forebodings. When Harold Fairhair had been to Thorhilf's splendid feast at Torgar, the two sons of Hilderid came up and wished him joy of his lucky journey, adding, "It fell out as was to be thought. You were after all the wisest and luckiest, for you saw at once that all was not so fairly meant as it seemed, and we can also tell you now that it was planned that you should be slain there, but the peasants felt a catch upon their breasts when they saw you." They add, it must be admitted that the pair of them knew how to flatter a king. And if we would see an instance of what lack of luck, or gefelici, is, we find an illustration in the saga which treats of the dealings between Hrafnel and his antagonist Sam. By dint of courage and a great deal of friendly assistance, Sam got the upper hand of the powerful and overbearing chieftain Hrafnel, but when he had got his enemy underfoot, he contented himself, despite all well-meaning advice, with humbling him and forcing him to leave his homestead in the district. Hrafnkel raised a new farm and quickly worked his way up again, When 6 years had passed, he was strong enough to begin thinking of bygone things, and learning one day that Sam's brother had come home from an illustrious career abroad, he lays to wait for him upon the very first ride from the landing place, and slays him. Sam seeks out his old friends and helpers, but they meet him with cold words. We once made all things ready for you so that you could easily be uppermost, but it fell out as we know it would, when you gave Hrothgar his life, that you would come to mourn it bitterly. We counseled you to kill him, but you would have your way. No need to look closely to see the difference in wisdom between you two. Hrothgar and you, he left you in peace, and used his strength first to make away with the man he deemed of most account. We will not let your want of luck bring us to our downfall. The Norwegian pretender, Olaf Yeguther the Unlucky, gained his name from the half-heartedness of his plans when a night attack upon Erling Skaki failed. Erling had fewer men, was taken by surprise, and had suffered a great loss, but the darkness covered him, and under shelter of a fence he slipped away down to his ships, and his men said that Olaf and his followers had shown but little luck in the fight, so surely as Erling's party were given into their hands, if they had but acted with more wisdom. There is all the difference of luck between Reed, good, prudent, and successful plans, and Unreed, bad plans, which may look sound enough, but are wanting in foundation. A wise man prepares his enterprises according to the time and circumstances they are to fit with him. He is capable of looking about him and interpreting what he sees. He does not let himself be confused by possibilities, but with strict logic discerns the actual state of things. When Thorstein judged that the time had come for avenging his father's death, he rode straight to the very homestead where the slayer lay concealed, and called upon his protector to live up the wretch. On the yeoman's making a show of innocence, he only said, "You, Grimund, are Hjolfir's only kinsman of note, therefore he is with you and nowhere else." And his conclusion had all the surety of a man of luck. It was not a result of suspicion, or supposition, or probability, but of knowledge and of insight. But the wise man can do more than this. He judged men beforehand, and thus is not led astray by ill-fated connections with men whose counsels are barren. From sure signs in face and ways and manner he deduces what is hidden in the stranger, whether he is a man of luck, one who will be in acquisition, or one whom it were best to avoid. The very wise man knows also the world outside human life, and can guess the connection between manifestations and actions. He knows the weather, and understands the speech of animals, or knows at any rate what they would say. He has a store of ancient knowledge in regard to things and events of the past, a knowledge which not only gives him dignity and esteem, but also security in his judgment of things now happening, and insight into the nature of things. He sees the past spread out about him in the same way as the present. The two penetrate and interpret each other, but his were a poor wisdom if he had not, apart from the mastery of past and present, also some familiarity with the yet unborn. Keen-sighted and foreseeing are identical terms among the ancients, the unknown coming to the man of luck in many ways. He was a great dreamer, who was aware of things before they arrived, and saw beforehand men moving on their contemplated ways. Hrothgar Freyskild's father, Halfred, even moved his entire homestead because a man came to him in a dream and said, "You are unwary lying there, Holfrid. Move your farm westward across Ljuflit. There is your luck." And the same day as he had brought all his goods into safety, the place was buried under a landslide. Thorstein Ingmundsson also avoids the machinations of a witch-fire through a vision in a dream, and she may well say, when she finds he is not to be drawn into the trap, it is hard to stand against the luck of these sons of Ingmund. But to dreams and clairvoyance one must be added the direct knowledge, which may be expressed in the words, "Few things come on him unawares, surprise him," or in the simple form, "My mind tells me." Therefore the wise man can follow his plan beforehand through time, test it and adapt it before dispatched, or hold it back till the way is ready. But if wisdom can go no further, then his rede or counsel would after all be only as a boat thrust out upon the waters without a crew, entrusted to favourable current and favourable wind. The wise and strong man's luck followed his plan, steering, pushing, and keeping it towards the goal. The thought goes forward, doing with force and effect what it was sent to do. It is as if it had eyes to see with, and sense to speak for itself, and at any rate it can force its way into folks' minds, and turn them as it will. All that it meets on its way through the world it takes to itself, and uses as its implement. The success of a plan depends wholly on what it has in it from its first outgoing, for it has its origin in a conception that gave it life, and inspired it with luck. The projects coming from the greatest minds are at one and the same time the boldest and the safest of execution. The king's luck takes form as mighty thoughts of conquest, as when Harold had the luck to make all of Norway one, and as inventions of genius, as for instance when a war-king conceives the edge of the wedge-shaped phalanx, which is mythically expressed as a device suggested by a god. If a man have not luck enough in himself to foster such a counsel as he needs, he goes presumably to a man of might, and begs him to put something of his own virtue into the undertaking that is already planned. And naturally, if one went to a man with some difficult business and asked his advice, one expected to be given good or lucky counsel, hell hath, and not empty words that one and oneself to fill with progress and blessing. Empty, luckless folk might come to grief with spiritual values because they did not understand how to use them, if properly handled. The counsel must return with fruit. Naturally, the ancient word reed, or counsel, comprises several meanings which are sharply differentiated in our dualistic culture. Plan and resolution on the one hand, and advice upon the other, are nothing but luck applied to one's own or to other people's affairs. If a plan really has life in it, then it can only be checked by a greater luck killing it. A thought from one some great wisdom can go out and offer battle. The higher wisdom need not wait until the counsel's been dispatched. It can lay itself like a nightmare upon a poor man's luck, and make it barren and confused. Thus it happened, to quote an instance from life, to the wise Thorleif of the uplands, when Olaf Tryggvason, for very Christian reasons, sought the life of his obstinate heathen chief, and sent his faithful servant, Halfrid the wayward Skuld, to carry out his design. When the poet-hero turned up in disguise at Thorleif's homestead, the old man asked what news he brought, and more especially if he knew anything of a certain Halfrid, for he has often appeared to me in dreams. Not that it should be strange for me to dream, but there will come king's men to this place ere long, and as to this Halfrid, I can never properly make him out from what a folk say, and my luck is at an end in the matter of what is to come. In other words, I may dream of him, but I see nothing in my dreams but a veil over the future. When a man brought forth speech out of his store of words, the hearers could discern whether he were a man of luck. The Northmen, and probably also the Germanic peoples generally, cherished a great admiration for art and words. Encomiums of fine oratory are frequent in their literature, and their delicate wording, together with keen judgment of effects, almost makes us sharers in the complacency with which the listeners settled down when a man stood up among them who had luck to send his words safely into what harbour he pleased. The lucky man's speech would fall into those short, sharp images that the Northmen loved, the well-formed sentences leading one another forward, instead of stumbling over one another. Just as the separate movements, struck in guard, fitted together when executed by a lucky body. The words of luck found vent in such proverbial concentrations of speech that struck at the very centre of a difficult, and cut at one sharp blow the question in dispute. Luck inspired a man at the moment of his fall to utter words so pregnant as to be held in memory to his honour. But words, if uttered by a man of great luck, had likewise the double edge peculiar to the weapons of victorious fighters. They struck down among men, loosed the spell of lukewarmness and lack of courage, or made open foes of secret haters, as Eagle thinks the gods that he could do. There was a great difference between what a king said and what a peasant said, even though they meant more or less the same thing. When Olaf Tryggvason stood up to the law-thing, where men crafty in words were gathered to oppose him, all were cowed out by the opposition by the utterances of the king. Words were dangerous. They could bite through luck and fix themselves in a man. They were not to be likened to sharpened arrows which wounded, but might then be drawn out and flung to the ground. For they had a life in them. They would creep out inside the victim, hollowing him out till there was no strength left in him, or they would change him and mold him according to their own nature. It was often a good plan to belabor one's enemies with words before attacking with weapons. One could in this wise weaken the opponent's watchfulness, blunt his courage and adroitness, and dilute his invulnerability. In Saxo's narratives of Fidlif's fight with the giant, the king commences the combat by uttering taunts, for, according to the medieval monk, the giant was easier to cope with when he had first been irritated by scornful verses. You three-bodied giant, almost knocking your head against the sky, why do you let that foolish sword dangle upon your side? Why cover that strong beast with a frail sword? You fought how big you are, and trust in that little dagger. I will soon make your onslaughts vain, when you strike with that blunt edge. Now there is danger that the sword may prove too light, and its edge unable to cut through. Seeing you are such a timid beast, you shall fall flat upon your face, for in that proud body you bear a craven and fearful heart, and your courage is not equal to your limbs. Therefore you shall fall without frame, having no place among the bold, but set in ranks of those whom no man knows. Now it were best for the giant to look up at his courage and his honour, and strike ere the words have taken effect. He will be robbed of his courage if the power from without be not flung back as quickly as possible. Once, when the Britons were attacked by the king of the Northumbrians, they had taken a whole little army of monks with them, and placed them in a safe spot to pray during the fight. King Athelfrid, with practical sense, first sent his men to cut down the monks, and then proceeded to deal with the warriors. If they call upon their God to help them against us, he said, then they are fighting against us, even though they use no weapons, since they oppose us with their prayers. Granted that such prayers were actually addressed to God, Athelfrid yet knew that even though the strong words made a slight detour, they would certainly end in the men for whom they were intended. The power of words is such that they can transform a man when they enter into him, and make a craven or a nithing of a brave man. The insinuation does not merely depreciate him upon his neighbour's eyes. Nay, the reverse, the contempt of the world is a result of the taunting gib having entered into the man, attacking his manhood, and in the truest senses rendered him a poorer creature. It eats its way in through honour and frith, and will not rest until his humanity is bitten through upon the root. The greater the tension in the sender's luck and honour, the stronger the word, and the more dangerous the wound. The utterances of petty folk, with little mind beyond their needs to lay in their words, might perhaps be taken lightly. Certain great men, indeed, might ignore them altogether. But if they were luck behind the words, it were wisest to lose no time in rendering them harmless, and getting one's honour back by vengeance. The counsel offered by Norwegian and Icelandic laws for cases of milder everyday misuses of vocabulary, to answer back word for word, is only valid to a very limited extent, and must be received with the greatest of caution. One must never forget that answering back does not give reparation, and it is well then to consider whether one can afford to forego a strengthening of one's honour. But words can, of course, equally well carry a blessing with them. A good word at parting is a gift of strength to the traveller. When the king said, "Good luck go with you, my friend," that man set out carrying a piece of the king's power within him. "Luck on your way to your journey's end, and then I will take my luck again," is a saying still current among the Danish peasantry. A good word given on coming to a new place meant a real addition to one's luck. When Olaf the Peacock moved into his new homestead, old Hulskuld, his father, stood outside uttering words of good luck. He bade Olaf welcome with luck, and added significantly, "This my mind tells me surely, that his name shall live long." Orthil, word luck, is the Icelandic term for a wish thus charged with power, either for good or evil, according as the speaker put his good will into his words and made them a blessing, or inspired them with his hate, so that they acted as a curse. There was a man's life in words, just as well as in plans, and in counsel. Thoughts and words are simply detached portions of the human soul, and thus in full earnest to be regarded as living things. The ancient word reed, or Anglo-Saxon leid, Icelandic ruth, is a perfect illustration of Teutonic psychology. When given to others, it means counsel. When applied to the luck working within the mind, it means wisdom or a good plan, and from an ethical point of view, just and honest thoughts. But the word naturally includes the idea of success, which accompanies wise and upright devising, and on the other hand power and authority, which are the working of a sound will. Men setting about to discuss difficult matters stand in need of rede and quickness of mind, says an old English writer, according to the Anglo-Saxon poet. The lost angels fell because their world no longer kept to their rede, but honor turned away from God's love. They did that which was sinful, and at the same time ill-advised, and thereby brought about their own undoing, and Satan complains that Christ has diminished his rede under heaven, rendering him powerless. A reedless man is weakened by lack of will, lack of power, and lack of self-assertion. The poet of the Anglo-Saxon Christ uses thus expression in order to depict the objectness of the damned. When they stand on the left side of the judgment day, and hear the Lord's command, "Go hence, accursed ones," they cannot withstand the bidding of the King of Heaven, bereft of rede as they are. Not until they have mastered the whole content can we realize the depth of Satan's exclamation. Why should I serve? I can raise myself a higher seat than a god's. Strong companions, famed heroes of unbending courage, that will not fail me upon the fight, have chosen me their lord. With such one can find rede. To feel the force in the ancient thoughts, we must take care that our dynamic theories are not allowed to slip in. Rede is not energy residing in the words, but the words themselves, as well as the soul. Luck stretches in one unbroken continuity from the core of man's mind to the horizon of his social existence, and this too is indicated in the meaning of rede, which comprises the state or position of a man, his influence and his competence. The inner state of a man in luck is described in Icelandic as a whole mind, hili huga, which of course comprises wisdom as well as goodwill and affection. The man of whole mind is true to his kin and his friends, stern to his enemies, and easy to get on with when lesser men come seeking aid. His reeds are really good gifts to the receiver, whole reeds, in Icelandic, or hilruth. Outwardly, luck is dependent upon the mutual love of kinsmen, while the flourishing of frith go luck and well-being. And in the opposite case, when men cannot agree, all life sickens and fades, until everything is laid waste. This rule applies to all frith communities, not only the family, but also temporary connections in the sign of frith, and under any other sign no alliance was possible. When men united in any undertaking, fishing or other occupation, the result would depend upon the power of the individuals to maintain friendly and sincere relationships with one another, and in the Laxadil saga we chance upon this piece of information. Wise men held it of great weight that men should well agree when on the fishing grounds, for it was said that men had less luck with their catch if they came to quarrelling, and most therefore observed caution. The state of honor likewise determines the rise and fall of the family. The man who gains renown wins not only the advantages that go with the esteem of his fellows, he augments the blessing, the power of growth, and the fertility both in his cattle and in his fields. He lays the foundation for a new kinsman in the family. The women will bear more easily and more often, and the children be more hopeful and forward. Even in late centuries, the reciprocal responsibility of honor and luck were so rooted in Norwegian popular beliefs that men could say, "No man has luck to gain and keep wealth until he has slain 2 men and paid for the deed to the heirs and to the king." And the same association of ideas underlays the faith of Norwegian peasants in the luck or healing power of families descended from stern and murderous men, whose honor could be proved by numerous killings. If frith and honor sicken, The result is a decline in all that appertains to the family, decline and finally downfall. The Beowulf has, as we have seen already, given a description of the effects of villainy, the dying out of the stock and the wasting of its goods. These verses, wherein the wages of cravenness are so depicted, no doubt allude primarily to the sufferings originating in man's contempt for lack of honor. But the picture can be applied word for word to an earlier and more original view, according to which the social consequences of shame were only correlative to its directly destructive effect. Never more shall any of that race grasp gladly the gold. The northern descriptions of the last things is not only enlarged from this curse. Men grow poorer and poorer. Their power of action, their courage, confidence, mutual feeling, and feeling of frith are scorched away. Brothers fight and kill each other. Cousins rive the frith asunder. Whoredom great upon the world, and no man spares another. However near of kin they may be, the heat of the sun declines. The earth grows cold and bare. Early frost and late frostbite off the young shoots. Summers grow weaker and weaker. Winters more and more stern. The poet of the Völuspá is certainly inspired by contact with Christendom for his eschatological vision, but there are only insignificant traces of direct impulse from Christian ideas. The inspiration caught from the West has worked so deeply in the poet that the ancient legends and images rise up and take on a new significance. His faith in the old ideals and his anguish at seeing them crumbling in the turmoil of the Viking age impregnate one another, and at the touch of Christianity, this interpretation of ethics and experience produces a coherent view of history on the strength of a leading idea. The poet's vision, which molds the traditional legends of its purpose without in any perceptive way changing their contents, and weighs a mass of disparate materials into unity, is the accumulation of guilt that drives the gods through one disastrous deed after another into their doom. And to the poet, guilt is identical with breach of frith and honor. The force of his idea reveals itself in the fact that he has placed the myth of Baldur's death in an intimate connection with the tenet of doomsday. The picture of the gods killing one of their brothers is given a central place, so that it gathers up the force of the events going before, and ushers in the twilight of the gods and of the world. That luck and progress are dependent upon frith and honor was a maximum borne out by the experience. But the sentence could with equal truth be read conversely. Luck is the condition that determines frith and honor. When frith is broken so that a kinsmen forget themselves towards one another, that fault lies in luck. Whether it has in some way suffered scathe, or it is by nature inadequate, leaving men helpless and without bearing. A good woman by the name of Saldis rejoiced in the 2 sons of her daughters. They were both promising lads, and moreover they loved one another tenderly. One day Oddbjorn, a woman who had read the future, walked into the homestead. Saldis presented her grandchildren to the guest with pride, and bade her prophesy, adding, "See to it that your words turn out happily." "Aye, promising are these 2 lads," Oddbjorn admitted, "if only their luck will last, but that I do not see so clearly." No wonder that Saldis spoke harshly to her, but the other only answered, "I have not said too much. I do not think their love will last long." On being pressed further, she blurts out, "They will come to seek each other's lives." And so it happened, when Sverri delivered the funeral oration over his kinsman and opponent, King Magnus, he began thus: "The man by whose bier we now stand was a brave man, gracious to his enemies, but we kinsmen had not the luck to agree well together." And so on with many fair words, such as he knew how to turn the way he would. It is instructive to see how this highly accomplished and reflecting struggler, Sverri, again and again in his calculated endeavors to speak in a popular tone, has recourse to the old ideas. He himself is a modern throughout, and purposely joins his cause with Christianity, and the strong element that has a future before it. But to get a grip on the men's minds, it is necessary to speak in a popular form. He knows this, and he understands how to do it. To form a happy couple, the bride and bridegroom need luck. Hrut, an Icelander of unusual qualities and high extraction, and also a man of great insight, was late in marrying. One day his friend proposed a match with a lady of good family, called Un. Hurt entered upon the plan, but rather hesitatingly saying, "I do not know whether we two will have luck together." Hurt did not know at that time that he would fall under the spell of an impious woman, but on a visit to Norway he found favor with the Queen Mother, and their intimacy embittered the subsequent conjugal life of Hrut and Un, and finally wrecked their marriage. Villainy, or the act and state of the Nithing, is identical with unluck. Late will that unluck pass from my mind, says Bolli, when Gudrun congratulates him on having killed his cousin Kjartan, and in the Vulcan saga, Svintryf is started with his volunteer career in these words, "All unluck come upon you, you killed your brothers." Strikingly effective is the outburst of feeling in Kalf Amundsen's words after the Battle of Strikelstad. Kalf and his brother Finn had fought on opposite sides of the battle, Finn being a staunch supporter of the king, whereas Kalf occupied a prominent place among those who worked for his downfall. When the fight was over, Kalf searched the field and offered help to his brother, who lay severely wounded. But Finn aimed a blow at him, calling him a faithless villain and a traitor to his king. The blow failed, and Kalf gratefully exclaimed, "Now the king is watching over you, not wishing you unluck, but knowing that I needed care." Kalf, who had been Olaf's bitterest opponent, now extols the fallen king's luck as being strong enough to prevent the unbound sorrow and anger of a king's man from turning to villainy. In Gisli's saga, there is an exchange of words where unluck and villainy are used alternatively with equal force. After Gisli had killed his sister's husband, he was hunted from one hiding place to another, but the insistent pursuit of his enemies was for a long time successfully thwarted by the extortions of his wife, Ud. On every occasion when Eorlif, who leads the avenging party, tries to drive her into giving up her husband, she pours out her scorn and insults him so cuttingly that he shouts, "Kill the dog, even though it be a bitch." Thanks to a brave man of the party, Hovard, Eorlif is saved from the ignominy of laying hand upon a woman. On seeing Eorlif forgetting himself, Havard exclaimed, "Our doing here is shameful enough, without wreaking such villainy as this. Up, and do not let him get upon her." Eorlif now turned his wrath upon his friend, saying, "It is a true word, choose your companion badly at home, and you will rue it upon the road." But the saga proceeds. Havard was much liked, and many were willing to follow him. Also they gladly saved Eorlif from that unluck. When villainy is called unluck, the latter term is not to be taken as an excuse. On the contrary, the word conveys a strong condemnation of the man who is denounced as being unlucky. When King Hakon, in the previous mentioned condemnation of taking vengeance upon the wrong man, calls such an act unluck, he is choosing the very sharpest term he can find upon his vocabulary, the word that comes nearest to the idea of a deadly sin. For unluck is mischief, and an unlucky man is the same as a nithing, or in certain cases, a potential nithing. The bluntest way of refusing a man who appeals for friendship is by saying, "You do not look to be a lucky man. You're good for Semniga, and it is wisest to have no dealings with you." These words simply imply morale as well as prudent misgivings. To draw out the full import of the sentence, we must give two parallel renderings. You have no luck in your doings. You cannot bring those about you other than ill fortune. And you are not to be trusted. A man may expect anything of you. And even when Njal says of his sons that they are not men of luck, the sentence had probably at that time a bitterer undertone than we now know to perceive. It implies that the young men want wit and forethought, and it means further that they are lacking in self-control and moral restraint. The uncanny symptoms of villainy lie in the fact that luck and honor are identical. Luck is the combination of frith and honor seen from another side, and unluck in the old sense is simply the reverse of that feeling of kinship we have now learned to understand. It is luck which enables men to maintain their frith, their friendship, to keep their promises, and refrain from dishonorable acts. But luck is more. It gives men the will to act morally, or rather it is the moral will itself. When the fruit utters his misgivings, "I do not know whether we two will have luck together," he is thinking of their power of having and keeping mutual love, and their ability of creating frith upon their home, as much as of their power of enjoying each other, or of having offspring. In the Germanic idea, the moral estimate is always ready to rise to the surface. In fact, for the expression of goodness, piety, and uprightness, the Teutons have no better words than lucky, or Anglo-Saxon selig, Gothic silis, and similar terms, which embrace the idea of wealth and health, happiness and wisdom. In later linguistic periods, the ethical side of the idea often becomes dominant, and determines the use of the word in Christian writings. Thus, the Gothic sils and the opposite unsils are, for the translator of the Bible, the best equivalent for the good and evil of the New Testament.